This is Jim Bell, the president and founder of Bell Investment Advisors. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on Facing Reality. The public pension system crisis offers a teaching moment for individuals and families planning retirement. If you're having audio or visual problems, you may call our office at 1-800-700-0089. 800-700-0089. We'll try to help you if we can. So, there's been lots of news articles recently about pension funds all across America and the situation that they're in. They are lowering their investment return assumptions in their overall pension planning. So this is a very important topic. It certainly has parallels to individual circumstances. So my whole point in doing this webinar today is to draw some parallels to what's happening in our society as a whole in the United States and how it relates to not just pension funds as a group, but to individuals and families in all cases. So obviously, the assumption that one uses for investment return, whether it's for a large group pension or an individual family, whether planning for college expenses or planning for retirement, it's a crucial variable in the equation. What very qualified financial planners will do is determine the expected return based on the needs of the family or the individual. What is the capital at work that you have, the assets that are going to generate income for your retirement, and what are your cash flow needs or expectations. And qualified financial planners can then develop a portfolio that just takes enough risk to achieve the expected return. What's happening with the public pension in the public pension system is that for a couple of decades now, many of them have been using the assumption that they can make an 8% net return annually on the assets that they're managing for their whole group. And in terms of facing reality with how pension funds have performed, many of those plans are having to let go of this 8% assumption. So this is something that has significant consequences, as I'll go through as we go. Just some clarification, pension funds are defined benefit plans promising guaranteed income for life. So these types of plans are disappearing from the private sector. Last time I checked, it was less than 8% of large corporations in the United States now even offer defined benefit plans. The reason that they are somewhat burdensome to the issuers is that there is a guarantee. For example, I've seen situations where if you work for a public institution like the University of California, you get a 2 or 3% credit for every year that you work. So, for example, if you get a 3% credit for every year of service, if you work there 30 years, you would get 90% of your average 3 highest years of income upon retirement. So you could continue to draw almost 100% of your highest salary even though you're retired. Obviously, that's a very ambitious burden to assume, and because of that daunting prospect, that's why many private corporations have abandoned them in favor of defined contribution plans, which are distinct from defined benefit plans, such as 401k plans. In the defined contribution plan, the onus is really on the employee to save and invest as much money as possible in order to plan for their retirement. And employers can match those contributions or make additional contributions at their discretion, but the burden has really been shifted to employees in the defined contribution plans. One example of where the expected return assumption is being lowered is the very large New York State Common Retirement Fund. It has lowered its target return target. It was already at 7.5% instead of 8%, but they've dropped it down a whole half point to 7%. Managers of group pension funds face similar challenges to what we face as individuals and families in terms of planning for retirement. The key questions in this process that are always addressed is, for example, on an individual basis, how much do I need to save? How do I invest for success? What does success look like? How much investment risk do I take? What's the nature, what's the construction of the portfolio to reach your goals? What is the expected investment return? And when can I stop working? These are questions that certified financial planners work with individuals and families to help answer. So this trend that we're seeing across the nation in terms of moving the expected return below 8%, it has very material consequences. Jean-Pierre Aubry of the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College reports that when a group pension, or even an individual for that matter, drops the expected return by 1%, it increases pension funding requirements by 12% annually. So imagine what that might mean to you as an individual or family. You would have to build up your savings rate on your net income up to 12, or move it up by 12% from wherever it might be now. So that's where the consequences become very meaningful and very, very direct. One of the differences between a public pension plan and an individual or a family is that pension fund directors are required to study the whole population of their beneficiaries and do actuarial studies on what the life expectancy is for the group. So in this case, they're managing a whole group to a specific promise. Like the example I used, that if you're promising your participants that you're going to pay 90% of their highest salary guaranteed for life, you have to be very rigorous in your calculations and your investment strategy and your saving strategy to accomplish that. What we see as financial planners in working with individuals is that we have some more flexibility, which I'll talk about in a minute. On this slide, tulips or wildflowers, it refers to a very interesting situation with the city of Boulder, Colorado, that they were facing a shortfall in their funding for their pension plan for their employees. And they addressed it in some difficult ways, but also in some interesting ways. On the difficult side, they did have to eliminate and lay off 100 city employees, I'm sure, which wasn't very pleasant, especially for the employees. But they also had a tradition in Boulder, the city, in public spaces all over town. They would plant tulips every year. And of course, in the springtime, the city was just gorgeous with tulips everywhere. It was a great public service and a morale booster. Although it was very expensive, tulips are pretty labor intensive. So in order to save money, and they actually ended up saving $1.7 million, they substituted wildflowers for tulips. So instead of all the labor involved in planting tulips, they're now scattering seed for wildflowers. So they'll bloom every spring and summer. So just kind of an interesting trade-off, and it's the kind of trade-off that demonstrates some flexibility, which families and individuals can also participate in at some parallel level. The U.S. Census Bureau has determined that local and state contributions to retirement systems have more than doubled in the last decade. So just think if you were a family and you had to double your rate of savings in order to prepare for retirement, that would be have a very dramatic impact. And what this means for the public entities is that there's less money for services such as education, police, fire, and recreation. So kind of in an extreme case, cities that don't manage this very well, they're faced with the prospect of having a very high percentage of their money allocated for public education, for example, and it's all going to take care, a large part of it's going to just take care of the retired teachers and personnel. So very unsatisfactory situation. As well as, along with the employer or retirement system contributions, the employee contribution requirements have increased by 50% over the same decade. So that has a big effect on individuals and families. In terms of flexibility, it is very much at play in personal retirement planning. For example, we've worked with many families here that will draft up a dream budget or spending plan, or a spending plan that they've manifest their goals and kind of lifestyle. And in one case, a family was hoping to spend $50,000 a year on travel, but in order to make their plan work so that they would have income for the rest of their lives, we determined that they could really only spend $25,000 a year without damaging their plan or making it very vulnerable. Same kind of trade-offs can be with, like most families will plan to replace their cars every 7 years. So are you going to replace it with a Tesla that's in excess of $100,000, or are you going to go with a hybrid that might be in the $30,000 to $40,000 range? Obviously, the difference in cost there is significant. These are the questions that we help families to answer and understand. Lawrence McQuillan is an author of a book called California Dreaming: Lessons on How to Resolve America's Public Pension Crisis. So in California, we have one of the largest pension funds in the world, actually. It's the California State Teachers Retirement System, often abbreviated as CalSTRS. And Mr. McQuillan has determined that the CalSTRS fund is at least $74 billion to $104 billion short in terms of they should have at least that much money invested now so that they can fulfill the promise to California teachers and other personnel. So the way that the California Assembly has addressed this with Bill number 1469, it has changed the requirements now so that teachers have to increase their contribution rate from 8% of their gross salary up to 10.25% by next year, 2016. That's a 28% increase in money that teachers are setting aside for retirement. I'm sure this is very significant for a lot of these teachers. On the part of the school districts, which also, certainly share a large responsibility in addressing and meeting these promises that they've made, the school district contribution rates have increased from 8.25% of payroll to 19.1% by year 2020. That's a 132% increase, which you can imagine how significant and material that is. So in the case of the school districts in California, these increases, they may save the pension system, but what's going to happen to the school districts? There will be much less money to hire teachers, repair schools, and build more classrooms. I think the prospect of collecting tax dollars just to pay your retired teachers and have hardly any money left over to keep your schools open and hire new teachers is a pretty nightmare kind of situation. And the problem with the whole public pension system is that politicians just have a history of over-promising the beneficiaries and then underfunding the contributions. So we run into a lot of trouble. I'll just tell a quick story about the state of Connecticut, which is pretty interesting. This was reported in the October 5th edition of the Wall Street Journal. Connecticut, as a state, has the richest population in the United States. And ironically, the state has only half the savings required to meet the promises they've made to Connecticut state employees. So in that situation, Connecticut, even though it's the wealthiest state, has a very low credit score. Just like we get credit scores as individuals, public entities and corporations also get credit scores. And when your credit score is low, it's because you're vulnerable, and when you borrow money, you have to pay more interest. One of the things that we do here at Bell Investment Advisors is that we're teaching courses now in financial literacy, mainly for young people, but it certainly applies to young adults as well, or anyone who feels vulnerable about understanding their financial circumstances. And we're doing a kind of supper seminar here in the office on November 17th at 6 p.m. If you and your young people might be interested, we welcome parents to come too. Please call our office here and let us know if you'd like to come. But based on Connecticut's credit rating, the interest rate they must pay is really high. They have the 5th worst credit score in all 50 states. So even though they have a very wealthy population, they've been very irresponsible about preparing for the future. The causes of their situation are inadequate state contribution, just like with individuals who don't save enough for the future. They've had subpar investment returns, so their expected return and portfolio allocations have not been kept up to date or managed well based on the goals and obligations they have. And of course, something that affects everyone, every plan, every individual, is that we are living much longer than we used to. The per capita income in Connecticut is $65,000 per resident. It's the highest in the country. And where Connecticut got in trouble is between the 1930s and 1980s. They saved no money. They made no contribution to the public pension fund. So for us, it's like we meet people all the time in their 50s that have done no planning or saving for retirement. So that's another similarity about how this crisis in the public pension system has individual parallel consequences. Just in summary of what we've been talking about today, on an individual level, certified financial planners help individuals create a balanced experience of integrating income, their spending, savings, and investing. Retirement planning for individuals and families can avoid the drama we are witnessing in public pension plans by facing reality sooner rather than later and starting to save and invest well in advance before you reach a crisis situation. Referring back to California Dreaming that Mr. McQuillan wrote, his point in the book is that he's really advocating that that public pensions begin aggressively migrating towards 401k plans. The defined benefit plans that are in place in so many governments, whether it's city, state, or federal, it's a very ambitious burden, and the politicians are very unreliable about addressing it in a prudent way. So those are the parallels that I wanted to share with you today regarding how the public pension crisis really relates to us as individuals and families. Just to let you know what we've got coming up, we've got an investment committee update middle of November, November 18th. That's for clients only. And then we'll be doing a year-end review and 2016 preview on December 16th. Is that right? Do I read that right, Paul? December 16th. So we'll be setting out notice about that, and for that review is open to the public at large. You'll see down the list, kind of just below the middle, we did record our financial literacy for adults and young adults in March of this year, and that recorded version is available on our website if you're interested. So I hope as you've been listening, if you've thought of some questions, we'd be happy to entertain those. We do have a few minutes left. Paul, I think you did see some questions. You want to go ahead and read those to me?
Yes, Jim. The first one we have is, if I have a pension, how do I know if it will be reduced?
Very important question. I've been reading a lot about this. In the private sector, there is a federal agency known as the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. So that's a government agency that oversees and supervises audits and collects insurance premiums from corporations that are offering defined benefit plans, pension plans. So they are a backstop, but guarantees are only as good as the resources and power of the entity making them. So although the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation has done a lot to be a safety net, their resources are limited. So in some cases, when private company pensions go bankrupt, in worst case scenarios, what the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation can do is pay beneficiaries $12,000 a year. In terms of thinking about guarantees and talking about guarantees, it's not as ironclad or safe as we would like to think. In the public pension system, for example, City of Detroit, we've all heard about them going bankrupt. So even when public entities go bankrupt, the beneficiaries are at risk because the courts only have so much resources to work with. It all depends on the strength of how the pension plan is being managed, and there is information online, for example, about something like CalSTRS. So if you're in a government pension plan, you can access information about what their assets are and what their burdens are. There's lots of data about many states and cities that are underfunded, so you can get that information online.
Yeah, Jim, and we have one more question. It's given that I do not have a pension, how much should I be saving for retirement?
Important question. This is where financial planners really play a crucial role. That's a personal question. So the only way we can answer that in an effective way is to know about your circumstances, your lifestyle, your income, what your dreams and ambitions are, how old are you, all these factors come into play. So one thing that's true about the financial planning process is, as financial planners, we do get pretty close to our clients in terms of the details of their lives and what their financial goals are. So it's really hard to answer that in a blanket way. I know in business school we studied kind of an ambition that if people can save 20% of their net income for their whole life, they should be in very good shape. Now that's pretty ambitious, but it may not need to be that much, but that you would certainly be safe if you saved and invested that much every year, starting at a very young age. All right. Well, that takes up our time today. We really appreciate your listening in, and there's lots of ways to stay in touch with Bell Investment Advisors, as you can see on this final page. Whether it's our website or following us on Twitter, LinkedIn. Bonnie Bell writes a blog on career and life coaching, and we also do a financial advisor blog, and we keep those current and up to date. You can email us at info@bellinvest.com, and we have a toll-free number as well as a local number here in Oakland. So thank you for joining us. We hope to hear from you, and thank you for being part of our webinar today.